Hello everyone, my name is Anuradha Akmimada and my presentation is on logistic regression analysis of major compounds identified in fire debris and to use an IU-based approach to calculate the likelihood ratios. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the support provided by the National Institute of Justice. I would like to give a brief introduction. First, we inspect the samples and we prepare the samples using three burn methods. After that, we extract these samples and later we analyze these samples using GC mass spec. And the main focus of this presentation is the data analysis of these samples. We prepare the samples using three different burn methods: modified destructive distillation method, direct heat and indirect heat methods. In modified destructive distillation method, we make sure that the top surface of the substrate is facing towards the bottom of the can and we cover the can with a punctured lid. In direct heat method, the top surface of the substrates is directly interacting with the flame, and also in the indirect heat method we make sure that the top surface of the substrate is directly interacting with the heat. So after we prepare these samples, we extract these samples following ASTM E1412. First, we cool the substrate containing can to room temperature. We insert activated charcoal strip. After that, we heat the cans to 16 to 18 hours at 66 Celsius degrees. Then remove the heat and allow the cans to cool down to room temperature. Finally, extract them with carbon disulfide. Instrumental method was performed using GC mass spec following ASTM E1618. All the information about the instrumental method can be found in the Ignitable Liquid Reference Collection database of National Center for Forensic Science. The data was analyzed using Automated Mass Spectral Deconvolution and Identification System (AMDIS). We analyzed these samples using simple batch analysis and used 80% spectral match, which is the net factor in AMDIS. And we used a standard mass spectral library which has 283 compounds. So this is a summary of the data analysis. We identified peaks of substrates and ignitable liquids using AMDIS, and then we calculate a SRT parameter, which I'll be discussing in the next slide. After that, we applied logistic regression to calculate the probability of the presence of this compound. A model was generated for ignitable liquids and another model was generated for substrates, and these models are used to do logistic regression. For this logistic regression analysis, we calculated SRT parameter, and in this equation, delta RT is the difference between the retention time of the observed peak in the sample and the retention time of the compound in the library. And this is the logistic regression equation that we used. Here, beta naught is the intercept and beta 1 is the coefficient of SRT parameter, and P is the probability of the presence of a compound based on the retention time similarity. These are the logistic regression curves we obtained for ignitable liquids and substrates. And as you can see, the probability cutoffs for ignitable liquids is around 0.82 and for substrates is around 0.91. Here at 0.82, SRT cutoff is around 0.962, and at 0.91 probability cutoff it's around 0.92. So this is how we determined the probability cutoff. In ignitable liquids, as I mentioned earlier, it is 0.82, and for substrates the cutoff is 0.91. So these cutoffs were obtained using specificity and sensitivity. Specificity is given in blue color and sensitivity is given in orange color. At this point in the literature, it says that identification of false positives are minimized. And these are the and we used a receiver operating characteristic curves to show the performance of these two logistic regression models. For ignitable liquids, we got an area under the curve of 0.95, and for substrates, we got an area under the curve of 0.99. At this 0.82 cutoff, a calculated likelihood ratio for ignitable liquids is 7.5, and at 0.91 cutoff, the calculated likelihood ratio for substrates is 17.27. After that, the most important thing is calculation of likelihood ratios, and this is done by applying naive Bayes approach. So in naive Bayes, equation is given in this slide, and in the numerator is a product of the probability of a compound given ignitable liquids divided by the product of the probability of a compound given substrates. In calculation of likelihood ratios using naive Bayes, we assume independence, and this is limited to major compounds observed in a sample, and in this case we designate this as K. So if a probability of a compound given ignitable liquids or a probability of a compound given substrates is 0, we run into problems. So because of that reason, we must predict the probability of observing a compound in the population that is unseen in the sample. For that, we use good Turing estimation. In good Turing estimation, we calculate the frequency of frequencies, and then we obtain the log of the frequencies and the log of the frequency of frequencies. After that, we use the best linearly fit model, and this probability of a compound given ignitable liquids or substrates will depend on the relevant population. So these are the good Turing plots we obtained for ignitable liquids and for substrates, and I have to tell you that we only used for this data analysis, we only used the substrate burns obtained from modified destructive distillation method. So this logistic regression analysis showed us that there are 66 compounds can be seen only in substrates, and out of those 66 compounds, styrene has the highest frequency of occurrence in substrates. And in ignitable liquids, it was found there are 41 compounds, and out of that, 2,4-dimethylhexane has the highest frequency of occurrence in the ignitable liquids. And next is the compounds that can be found in both ignitable liquids and substrates. So there are 137 compounds that can be seen in both ignitable liquids and substrates, and in substrates, toluene has the highest frequency of occurrence, and in ignitable liquids, 2,6-dimethyl-octane has the highest frequency of occurrence. So after that, we calculated likelihood ratios using naive Bayes, and we did a 10-fold stratified cross-validation. So calculations were performed following the procedure I'm going to explain later. So we selected 445 MDDM burn data and 639 ignitable liquids data, and we randomly selected 10% of data, and that is called test data, from each data sets. So in MDDM test data, it has 45 samples, and for ignitable liquids, it has 64 samples. So frequency of occurrence of these major compounds in ignitable liquids and substrates were calculated using the 90% of the data. So that is called training data. After that, naive Bayes likelihood ratios for substrates and ignitable liquids test data were calculated by the frequencies calculated for training data. Finally, we calculated log likelihood ratios for these test data. So calculation of likelihood ratios were based on three types of compounds present in substrates and ignitable liquids. First set is the compounds present in ignitable liquids and substrates. And the second one is common compounds that are found in ignitable liquids and substrates. And the final compound set we chose was compounds present in ignitable liquids. So for each compound set, we did a ROC curve, DET plot, and ACE plot. For compounds that can be seen in ignitable liquids and substrates, provided the log likelihood ratios calculated for this set of compounds, provided us a ROC curve which has an area under the curve of 0.996. And in the DET plot, so it's the second one, in the DET plot, if the curve is closer to the origin, that means these log likelihood ratios have a higher discriminating power. And here, the equal error rate of these calculated log likelihood ratios is less than 5%. And in the ECE plot, so this dotted line is the calibrated likelihood ratios after pool agents and violators, and the red line is the experimental likelihood ratios. And if these two lines are closer together, that means these calculated log likelihood ratios have a higher calibration. So in this case, as you can see, these lines are further apart, so it means that these calculated log likelihood ratios have a poor calibration. And the second set is the compounds that can be seen in ignitable liquids and substrates. So here also we have for the ROC curve, we have an area under the curve of 0.99, and the DET, the equal error rate, is closer to 5%, and the calculated log likelihood ratios according to the ECE plot, they have a better calibration than the previously discussed method. And the final set is the compounds that can be seen in ignitable liquids. Here also we have an area under the curve of 0.99, and the equal error rate obtained by the DET plot is around 5%, and the calculated log likelihood ratios for substrates have a better calibration than the calculated likelihood ratios for ignitable liquids. So after that, so we did a validation using 16 5-Debre samples generated in the lab. So when we used compounds present in ignitable liquids and sub, it identified 10 samples. And common compounds present in ignitable liquids and substrates, it identified 12 out of 16 samples. And finally, when we used compounds present in ignitable liquids, it identified 14 out of 16 samples. So likelihood ratios, finally the conclusion is that the likelihood ratios calculated using compounds present in ignitable liquids has the highest accuracy when tested with the real 5-Debre data. In future work, we are planning to calibrate these likelihood ratios, and also we're planning to apply these methods for a larger data set. Thank you very much.